Yo, what's good, everybody? Primo here again. Going on an update for Warp Drive. I had my first public playtesting playing with other game designers on this past Monday. I got three people who also are designing games to play Warp Drive, and I also got to play one other person's game that they are working on, which was a really fun um, like roll and write type of game, which I honestly haven't played too much of, but I really like some of the mechanics he had. But for the feedback that um, I received, it was honestly um, eye-opening in the sense that I've heard people say similar things in the past, but never as definitive, basically stating that this is an issue, like an actual big issue with the design of my game. My friends have mentioned something similar before, but it was never like, I think this needs to change. It's too overly complicated. The common thing that was said to me was my game felt like it was two different games. The theme of the game and then the overall complexity of the game did not match. The racing aspect of the game, most racing games are fairly simple. There's not a lot of overly complicated things within the game. But my game, the player boards were so overwhelming. They said that it was just a big issue. Just even going from the boards to the actual part where you are racing and performing other actions, the boards just felt like it bogged. They said it felt like it bogged down the the game too much, essentially, for what the theme is. Which now hearing them, like all three of them basically said that in some way or form, that really hit home. And one of the guys, his name is Chris Baki, who is like a very experienced game designer. He's the one that I got to play that um, the other game. I got to play his roll and write game essentially with one other guy with him. And he said something that like was 100% true, that he was saying that there's two different styles of designing. One is, using a metaphor, is one is a sculptor where you basically throw a very big idea down and then you start cutting away at that idea to make it better. And the other is like a painter where you start with nothing, start with something very small and slowly build up from that. And he told me that he 100% knows that I am like the my idea started from like a sculptor's like metaphor essentially, and he's 100% right. I made something really big for the theme, um, and then I start cutting down. Like I've cut out so much from the game already, just making it better slowly and slowly over time. And his recommendation, which I really took to heart hearing, was he said to just take the core idea that you're trying to build and just start really small and build up from that. So I'll show you what the player boards look like that they got to see, that I'm sure if you've watched these videos at all before that you will recognize them. This is the player board that they got to see essentially. There's a lot of things going on this board, and I've looked at these boards so much that I never really thought about how much was on these boards, because I have seen other games that are just very complex games, but their complexity usually doesn't come on their player board. It's either like um, game decisions or like just different cards that you're playing to make decisions with, instead of your actual board having so much involvement. So I took that to heart for what he said, and I tried to start thinking about some ideas to really cut back and start basically from the bottom with something small and going up essentially. If you've watched my last video, you'll know from even just the previous boards, there was actually two more stats on these boards as well. There was a power and a shield stat that I just cut out to try to make it even more simpler because I knew that from all the good feedback my friends have given that it was an issue, and I was trying to find that happy medium with still liking, you know, pretty much all the mechanics that I had thought of and created for the game. But my biggest lesson I've learned over time is don't fall in love with um, like a small part of an idea essentially. Not even don't fall in love with an idea where you don't ever plan to get rid of it. You have to be open to testing things and then just completely getting rid of them. I used to have a hack mechanic in this game that I honestly really liked the idea of, but it just didn't feel rewarding, and that's something you had to cut out. And then the more I thought about this version now of how I can make it simpler was cutting out even more of the stats, but also keeping the core idea that I want, which is a racing game where you also build your spaceship stronger as you go, which is not in the other racing games. The other racing games you kind of get an ability or you just play stuff to manage your speed for the turns, but this is a spaceship themed racing game, so I want there to be action essentially, but I need it to be much simpler than this. So I had an idea a really long time ago. I actually proxied all the cards for, and then I never took it to table with my friends or anyone to play test. And it was a deck building idea that was fairly simple, and um, you it had like a money system where you had to buy cards based on what you had, and you had to manage energy essentially so that you could keep your speed up. Basically, the energy impacted your speed. If you went into the negative in energy, it would slow your ship down. Um, and a lot of those ideas from that I liked, but I never took it to the table because I did feel like the energy system didn't really feel as rewarding as it needed to be. So when I started thinking about cutting down, I'll just show you how I've already made the transition to try a new implementation of the deck building idea that I had, and I'll show you how simple the player boards are now. As you can see, this is all the player boards have now. Is you have a base movement, a base range, and then you have each character will have their ability, like Darkseid has this ability, and then they have a 6 card starting deck. And one of the traits, you'll have 2 of the cards in it. So for example, Darkseid has 2 of the Ram cards in it. And then you'll have one of the 6 traits, you'll have 0 cards in your starting deck. So for example, he has no ludicrous speed, which gives you additional movement. So, and I went through and I made it unique for all of the 10 characters. They all have their own ability. But now the in-game is much simpler. You're just managing your cards essentially. And I'll take you inside of Tabletop Simulator so you can see it. I have Sal's set up. This is his starting 6 card deck. So you would shuffle your deck and then you would draw 5 cards, and then for the turn you would try to connect the cards. So something I wanted to keep from the previous game is, if you remember the engineering cards where you connected things, you can see this is the market of cards at the end of the turn you'll be selecting from. But you can see in the bottom left and right that they have the little arrows essentially, and it's basically me just keeping the simplified version of the engineering cards. So it's nowhere near as complicated. So I'm just going to show you his full deck essentially, his starting deck, and you'll see he has 2 Ram cards in here, but he has no regen. So, and I'll explain what each one of these do. But essentially, I just put these in random order right now. Some of them actually are working right now. So you can see, for example, these two cards, they connect right here with these two accuracy symbols pointing at each other. So that means when you start your turn of upgrading your spaceship for the turn, you would play one of these cards down first. So for example, we'll just say the Ram card is the first one we put down, and then you'll try to connect cards from your hand on either side of this. So I could play this card here, and then I could play this card here, and you keep doing it as much as you can. So the starting decks right now, I have it where you can connect all of the cards basically, but you're only drawing 5 of them unless you're Snarl. Snarl actually is a hand size of 6. So you can see that in this scenario here, you would actually get to connect all of your cards, and then you would gain for the turn. Basically, once the building phase is done, you would separate your cards by their abilities, and then you're going to perform these actions individually. So when it comes to your turn, you would pick one of these actions to perform on the actual board, and then you also have your base movement. So you can do the base movement anytime that you would like, once per round. But basically, you're not going to do all 6 of these actions at once, which will make the player decision more interesting. So the one that I'm really excited for is the warp card. So say that I wanted to play the warp card for my first action, I would just turn it sideways and say, okay, I'm going to use my warp card. You would most likely want to do the movement first and then warp, but you don't have to. And the way the warps work, if you are familiar with the game and you look at the board, there's no warps on the board at all now, and there's no cows on the board. So if you remember the last video, the cow asteroids you now get to throw. That's what the powerful one does. And now the way warps work, which I'm really excited about, is wherever you play your warp from, you get to move 3 spaces ahead, and then wherever you end, you actually leave a warp permanently on the board now. So if someone else can go into that warp now without needing to play a card. Each time that you go into a warp, as you can see, you take a damage. It's on the card as well. You take a damage to your ship right here. And once you take 3 damage, you would add one of these ship damage cards to your discard pile, and it gets shuffled into your deck. And the way that you remove them permanently is every time that you do play one of the regen cards, which Sal does not have in his starting deck, so that's his weakness. Once you get 3 of them played, you'll move this up here, and then you can permanently remove one of these cards from your discard pile or your hand. You can't search your deck for it, so it's a timing thing. So you're managing a lot of different things, but your decision making now, you get to actually do individual things first. So it may have been more advantageous the first turn if you did ludicrous speed instead. So for each ludicrous speed card you have, you get to move 2 spaces. And when you do the movement for the turn, you just say, I'm going to use the movement with this action. And that just means you have to do the complete movement by the end of your action, essentially. So if I wanted to, technically, I could move 1 space, then play, just for an example, like my accuracy card to shoot at somebody, and then use my remaining last movement to move 1 more space. Just basically, you'll put a red block on your movement once you've done it for the round, so that you know you've already done it for this round. But you can basically use the movement to get yourself in range of any of your other cards, just to make it a more advantageous decision for you. So maybe the first turn, though, just doing the ludicrous speed with your movement, if you're the very first person to go, maybe that will feel better because you get to move 4 spaces now, 3, 4. And then it goes on to the next person, and they get to do the same thing. They get to choose one of their built actions. and um, go from there essentially. So and then it'll come back to me, and then if there's, say, someone moved even further ahead of me, like say that Snarl got all the way to here somehow with his one action, um, you could then play. I'm going to play both of my Ram cards, and the way Ram works is you get to dash 2 spaces for each card, as long as you are going to interact with another opponent's spaceship. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces away. It's perfect. So I get to dash 4 spaces forward, and then I get to move them 1 space forward or sideways, which sideways would obviously be better there. If there's a Calstroid or something like that here, then that would be advantageous because it takes away one of their movement. But it also, as you can see, on the RAM cards and the accuracy cards and the powerful cards, when you hit someone, they take damage from this, and it happens for each card. So this, I would actually deal 2 damage to them for ramming them. But Sal's special abilities, he actually deals an extra damage. So he would actually deal 3 damage total from these 2 cards because of his ability. I need to reword that and just say 1 additional damage for a ramming attack. But you can also break your actions up. So say we did the same thing, but Snarl's only 2 away, but then beyond Snarl is another ship two spaces away. You can do both of your ram cards again, and then you can do it split up. So you can do one to dash to Snarl ship and move him one, and then you could dash with the other card to move Barber one here. And then they would both take 2 damage actually because of Sal's special ability there, which will be it'll say 1 additional damage on when he rams them. So then it wouldn't be Snarl's turn, or I'm sorry, Sal's turn, but now he's moved up 4 spaces and dealt 4 damage, which is a really good turn essentially. So and then basically it'll go until everyone has nothing left that they can play for the turn. So after everyone's played all their cards that they built, then there'll be one last final thing for the turn, which is everyone in order, the turn order, will get to take 1 card and place it into their discard. So for example, Sal may want to get regen early just so he is capable of repairing those the damage cards that he will inevitably get. And then the new turn would happen, and you would take the cards you built, put them into your discard. I guess I can do the grouping and then turn it. And then whatever card you have remaining, you would draw first, and then you would flip your discard pile and shuffle it back as your deck and draw those cards. So it's going to be an um, interesting little decision making game because you have to build your cards so they can connect with each other so you can have bigger turns. And then you also are going to be playing them in specific orders based on what's in front of you, or just anticipating something else as well. Like, say, for that same example, say that Barbara is the first person to go, but Sal is number 2, and you'll be able to see open knowledge that Sal has 2 RAM cards. So Barbara would then want to do something to basically hurt his build for this next action that he gets by using some type of movement to get away from this space so he's not in range for both of his RAM cards. So she could use her default movement of 2. She could use a warp card, a ludicrous speed card, and just make sure that she is out of range, so that he needs to make a different decision, or um, he'll still be able to use both of his RAM cards. It's just not going to impact her So like he'll be able to ram here and still move this, but she's not going to get damaged from it. Because that's the one thing for ram is even if, say, the person is one space away from you, you can play both your ram cards to do the damage to that person and then use the full movement afterwards. So I could hit Snarl and then still move 3 spaces, and then you would move Snarl somewhere and he would take the damage. But for example, if Snarl was 5 spaces away, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, my ramming cannot reach Snarl unless I use my movement. And if I've already used my movement, then I would basically have to try to get in range using other movement cards like Warp, and then hope on the next action when it comes back to me that I am in range to ram. So it's a lot of little decision makings like that that I think will make it fun. The fact that we're leaving the warps on the board now too will be really like the second lap is going to be really entertaining as you go into them. So say that this is on the board already and Sal goes into it, he gets to then move 1, 2, 3 spaces. He takes 1 damage, but now the warp actually follows him and goes where he ended. So he gets to move it. And then the the other thing that is extremely cool is say the same thing happens where Sal moves into this space with this warp, and then within the 3 spaces that you get to move from this warp, 1, 2, 3, you get to another warp. You get to move 1, 2, 3 again, but now these warps are going to stack. So Sal would have moved 6 spaces and took 2 damage, but now the warps are stacked basically on top of each other. So the next player could go into that warp and move 6 spaces and take 2 damage as well, but they didn't have to play any cards. It's just getting stacked here now, which is really cool. I'm gonna have to change the sizing so that this doesn't fall through, though. I just realized just doing that. But you can have a warp eventually be like 4 or 5 high, and it's going to cause a lot of damage, but that player's going to get an incredible amount of movement for the turn without playing any cards. So, and it's also a way, the warps are also a way to, when you play them, of how you can avoid the Calstroids. Because the Calstroids, when you're in them, it costs 2 movement to move out of it. So just to move from this space to here would cost 2, when it normally would just cost 1 if it was this space to this space. So if you play a warp, though, once you go into the warp, you're just basically traveling through the space without recognizing anything that's there. So this would not cost you an extra movement to go through it. It's a way to go around it. So it would be 1, 2, 3, and then you would leave the warp here. Maybe I'll make it that the warp is 1 space behind where you entered, or where you exit, just so it's not like a pain to do this. I like this idea as well because it gives people like a really good reason to try to ram someone that's in this space, because whenever you hit them, you then go into the warps and then travel 6 spaces for the 2 that are there. So that's something I'll have to work out, but I really like the idea of these. I'm trying not to make the cows worse, but it is a cool little mechanic. They're sacrificing damaging their ship to go around the Calstroid without losing additional spaces. So that is a cool little thing. But by the second lap, there's going to be tons of cows everywhere, warps all over the place as well. So it'll be the decision making will be a little more dynamic in the sense that you're like, do I want to damage my ship this turn, or do I have too many of these cards in my deck already that I need to just say screw it, I'm going into the Calstroid and losing some movement just so I don't damage myself. Because you don't have to play every card that you can connect every turn. You can just say, I'm going to pass using this card for the turn. It's just whenever you pass and you have cards remaining. So say you use both of these rams already and you only have this. If you say pass, then you are done for the turn. So even though this card was ready to be used, if you're just deciding not to use it because you say you're sitting right at the 2 damage, you don't want to risk adding another card, the damage card, into your deck. Then you can pass, but then you would basically tap the card out and you're done for this whole round until everyone else is done with their cards. So I think it's going to be a really fun idea. I am curious to see how people like it. Oh, one other thing I forgot is these core tokens. You gain these when you successfully land a ranged attack. So you have your base range, which Sal has a 4, which means you can target someone within 4 spaces, but you have to play an accuracy card to actually fire at them. And when you play an accuracy card, you get to add 1 additional space to your range as well. So he would actually have a range of 5 if I actually built this card for the turn, and you could shoot at one person. And the nice thing about accuracy is if you have multiple of them like this, say you built these successfully, you can actually shoot twice at 2 different people. It's just this would give you a range of 5 and you could shoot at one person and do a damage. But this one wouldn't give you a range of 6. It would do the range of 4 again plus the 1. So it'd be a range of 5. If you need to use both of these to get to a range of 6 to target one person, then you could do that and it would do 2 damage to that person because it's 1 per card. So it's going to be interesting to see if I have too much damage in the game to start with allowing the stacking of cards and the damage from it. Um, but I think it'll make this card way more interesting and purposeful by having the stacking damage that is permitted. One thing I haven't gone over is the powerful ones. Basically, whenever you are if you played one powerful card, so if you only had one of these built for the turn, you could throw it 1 space. So for example, if I was Sal and I threw it 1 space, if you're able to hit a person, then they move back 1 space. If I actually had 2 powerful cards, I could throw it up to 2 spaces. So say that Barbara is there, would go 1, 2, and now it actually moves her 2 spaces. So it moves her the amount of cards that you played as well if you successfully hit. And it would also do 2 damage, 1 damage per card. So powerful is the only defensive card in the entire game besides the repair right now, which I like that a lot actually because I was trying to focus on too much like the maneuver and everything in the previous versions, but I really like this. And then you can also do it the opposite way where say I have a cowl full of 2, you can still throw the cowls forward 1, 2, and then they basically kick. So they would kick her backwards 2. So you can use it in many ways to disrupt your opponents, also drop it behind you. The person that benefits from this the most, of course, is Terminator. If you look at her ability, instead of it costing 2 to leave a Calstroid, it cost her 0. So she can actually drop the Calstroid in front of her and move into it for 1, but then it costs 0 movement to leave it. So this space will cost no additional movement to get here. So there's a lot of cool ideas that I'm very hopeful for. I hope that the deck building is something that people are receptive to because I didn't want to do deck building at first just because of how popular Pedal to the Metal is, Heat, which is it is a really good game, but didn't want to be in this exact same lane. But since you're actually building your ships up in our game, and not just managing your heat, which is a great mechanic, don't get me wrong. I just wanted to do more with this game. I'm perfectly fine with if this is something that people like, the deck building version that I'm perfectly on board with. Um, it's just taken me a long time to get to this point because I did want to try a lot of ideas. Unfortunately, I tried too much with those other boards like I was showing you in the beginning of the game. But yeah, I'm hopeful for this version. It's still the race. Now it's just a more simplified, it's an easier engineering phase where you're just connecting them based on these icons. So again, for example, those two cards would connect because of the accuracy symbols that are pointing at each other, and then you would gain one regen, one accuracy for the action phase. So that's something I actually like. It still kept the engineering aspect where you have to connect the specific icons. These obviously are just the generic version of the cards. If this part of the game does work out, I just threw together what assets I already had from what Pedro had put together for me. So I just made cards out of them. But I'm really hopeful. I think this is going to be a fun version of the game. I think it's going to be the most fun version. I really like the warp ideas being on the board permanently now, where you can go into them without playing a card and you just have to take the damage, but then you get to move 3 spaces. That's something I didn't mention as well. If you have 2 warp cards for the turn and you're playing them, you would get to move 6 spaces, but you would take 2 damage. But then the warp, so if Sal played the 2 things, he would move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the warp would come out in this area. I'm still deciding now. um, I think it's going to be 1 space behind instead of the actual space. So it'll just drop 1 space of the players choosing behind them. And you can't move backwards unless you use a ram card. So if you use a ram card, you could go from here backwards if you wanted to, but that's a really risky thing because you are just losing, you know, distance. Um, I guess it's something I would have to determine because technically you could go here to ram and you would go into the warp. So maybe I won't allow ramming backwards. Um, yeah, probably not. Just to protect the uniqueness of the warp, I don't want people to be able to abuse it. So yeah, I guess you'll only be able to ram forward. But yeah, a lot of cool ideas. I just have like a big card here telling what each thing does. So it's easy. There's a round order, what you actually do. And yeah, I have all of the unique player boards. I guess I can go through these really fast. Zella has a shield, as you can see in the bottom right there, that she gets to prevent the first 3 damage that is dealt to her. So she gets one full damage card that would be added to her deck negated. And then the damage also counts on the warp cards that she plays, though. So if she plays a warp card and she takes damage, it will remove that from her shield. And there's no way to repair that shield in the lower right. Only the regen in that top center there, that'll repair the full damage cards. Then there is Turbinator, who we talked about. She can leave those Calstroids for 0 instead of 2. So the second lap, she will have an incredibly, uh, a lot faster lap. And depending if people are paying attention, if they connect a bunch of Calstroids in a row, it can make her have an insanely strong second lap. Her first lap, if she's not using the Calstroids that actually knock opponents back, then she could still have a pretty good first lap, gaining some extra movement as well. Tanner is he can shoot into warps and it comes out of any warp that he wants to target opponents. So they can be extremely far away. He has a range of 4, but they could be all the way across the map if he wanted, if he could shoot into one warp, into another warp that is sitting on the board to target them. And you have Snarl. Snarls is just simply everyone else has a hand size of 5. He has a hand size of 6, which I may change the hand sizes eventually. But I need a play test to figure out if it needs to be a higher number or not. Barbara, when she uses a warp card or goes into one of the open warps on the board, each one of those she gains 1 additional movement space, or 1 additional space of movement. So normally people play a warp card or go into warp, they get 3 movement, she would get 4. Dark side is once per round, he gets to pull an enemy ship 1 space towards his ship. So it probably feels weak on paper or just reading it, but he can set up his ram cards much easier. He can set up his attack cards much easier by pulling them into his range, which will be very useful, I feel like. So it'll be fun to play test this one because I originally had it written once per round, but that's way too much, I think, because you can just pull if you connected 6 cards, you could pull an opponent 6 times backwards, which is too good. So it's once per round. But I still think that'll be good. Ego can build with 2 engineering cards. What that means is you normally would start with 1 card, but Ego can actually start with 2 cards on top of each other like this, so it's easier for him to find, the connections where he doesn't have to do it all in one row. He can do this, and then he gets all 4 of these cards for his actions for the turn, which I think will be really good as you build your cards. iFongs is simply it takes 2 of the regen to repair the full damage cards instead of 3. So she already has 2 of these cards starting in her deck, as you can see. And every time she gets 2 of those, she can repair a full damage card, which is going to be very useful. And then Premies is really, really cool. When he uses a accuracy card to make an attack, he actually shoots at that target twice. So he would do 2 damage every time he uses one of these accuracy cards. So he can do a ton of damage, but he only has a movement of 3. He has no ram cards. He has less of the movement cards. So that's something you'll have to work towards building. But you can do a lot of damage with his attacks, which I think is a really cool mechanic. And then Sal's, I just got to reword it probably a little better. Whenever you ram someone, he does 1 additional damage on the ram. So if you played 2 cards, he would do 3 damage total. So the way it's worded right now, I think people would read it as 4 damage, so I need to fix it. So, but yep, that's the idea for Warp Drive that we're going to be testing next. I'm trying to get testing done this Sunday. I don't have any real commitments besides my buddy Kevin right now. I need at least 1 other player. So if you are free to play test, please let me know. You can join our Discord. Let me know in the schedule section so that we can do some testing. Otherwise, just join the Discord and talk about any of the games that I'm working on. Or any ideas that you may have or critiques, anything like that. I appreciate feedback regardless because I have so much inexperience still, even though I've been working on these games for a while now. That is just kind of like just talking to Chris the other day, like was really eye opening. Just listening to him talk about his game and how he like really articulated his ideas for his designs and things that he was going over, and then the feedback he was giving. It was just, you could tell how much experience he has with game designs. I believe he even mentioned that he has like 2 or 3 games coming to Kickstarter by the end of this year, which is exciting for him. So but yeah, join the Discord, start a conversation. Hopefully we'll see you in some playtests. Cheers.